Welcome to everybody to our next installment of the Knowledge Mobilization Flash Talk series. We are really fortunate to have Lorna, Dilley, and Kristin Kappelman here to talk about creating shared services with Milwaukee Succeeds. So with that, I will pass it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Lorna Dilley with Milwaukee Succeeds.
I'm Kristin Kappelman, also with Milwaukee Succeeds.
And I'll share my screen here real quick. Okay. So let me just put this in. This always happens to me. Okay, well, anyway, we're going to talk today about shared services, and Milwaukee Succeeds is part of the Greater Milwaukee Foundation's education initiative. And part of Milwaukee Succeeds is part of a national organization called Strive Together. We are one of about 70 partnerships across the country that are working to improve education outcomes through systems change. And one of the benefits of being a member of Strive Together is that they play a role of doing a lot of convening. And so they convene partnerships across the country. And one way they do that is through what they call role-alikes. And so that means all the data leads from partnerships around the country come together monthly and talk about different topics. And so kind of out of that, the data managers from across the 4 partnerships in Wisconsin have been meeting for several years. And so those are Achieve Brown County and in Green Bay, Building Our Future in Kenosha, Higher Expectations for Racine, and then Milwaukee Succeeds. And even though each of our partnerships might have a different context, whether that be geographically or the number of school districts we work with. For example, you'll see some of those partnerships focus on the county. Milwaukee, our scope happens to be just the city of Milwaukee. But even though those are different, we have come together regularly now, and primarily for 2 things. So the first one is just to explore data-related topics of interest. So we brainstorm about things that are of interest and relevant to our work, and talk about those things monthly. The second thing is this shared services idea. And so this is more of a recent idea that has come up where we've talked about, well, how can we bring some efficiencies to the work that we all have to do? And so I'm just going to say a couple of examples of those, and Kristin's going to talk about some as well. One is we all used to go to DPI, and Carl knows this firsthand, go to DPI and say, can we get this data and that data and this data for our own communities? And we decided to come together to try to make that more efficient, and met multiple times to come up with a plan to meet with DPI and come up with all of the relevant data points that we needed and sort of make one ask. And then it was easier for DPI to sort of plug in each of our communities, but it just made the whole thing more efficient. And we came up with data sharing agreements and so forth. And so that was one positive thing that we've done. Other things are one community might do for an employment dashboard, for example. The people in Racine County created an employment dashboard for Racine County. And once we started talking about these shared services, they were able to then plug in the data for each of the rest of our counties. And so they did that for all communities then. Same thing with this idea of creating school boundary maps that will eventually be connected with census data. And our colleagues in Green Bay are doing those for all of us. Other things that are sort of like we do together include data validation and review. We're just kind of getting started with this because we have to get approval from DPI to share our own data with one another. But that's a way to help us validate each other's data with our own kind of limited capacity to do that. So, and then finally, data equity standards with, data equity being just much more prevalent now and more important, we came together to decide, okay, what can we all agree on of these principles that we want to have, just some foundational principles around how we share data and keep with a data equity lens. And so we actually have finished that and created those. And I think Kristin included a link to those if anyone's interested. So I'll hand it over to Kristin.
Thanks, Lorna. So I'll talk a little bit about the Wisconsin partnership. And if you can go to the next slide, Lorna. Which is one of kind of our bigger shared services. So the 4 Cradle to Career Strive Together networks in Wisconsin that Lorna had mentioned before, doing really great work in the early childhood space, but running into some state level policy roadblocks. So they joined together, and with funding from Strive Together and the Ballmer Foundation, created the Wisconsin Partnership. And the goal was to improve outcomes for children from birth to 8 by changing the state level policy. So how do we go about doing this? One, we created community data sheets, and I'll drop a link in the chat to our website, which is going to have a lot of this information. So when our community engagement leads would go out and talk to parents, talk to childcare providers, businesses, they could present the data as to why this was so important. For example, the national recommendation is that childcare should cost no more than 7% of a family's income. And across our 4 communities, that range is actually from 20 to 40%. So a much higher rate than what the national recommendation is. We also work together to create a parent-child care survey. So we wanted to hear directly from parents, what were some barriers? What were some good things that were happening with childcare? And what was their overall experience? And so we were able to create a survey so that we could gather parent-level data in each of our local communities. And lastly, we worked together to create the Parents Advocating for Childcare, or PAC Fellowship. This was a paid 8-month advocacy training program for parents to advocate to elected officials for childcare. So not only did we teach them and really build up their skills related to advocacy, but we showed them how to use data and how to find data related to childcare. And how to reach out and contact their elected officials. So many people were unsure of how to do that. And one thing I just wanted to highlight real quick is pre-fellowship, when we asked parents, what power do they have to impact state policy? Not a whole lot. We can talk to our representatives, but it doesn't mean that they'll help much. Post-fellowship, we saw this really great shift. Parents are very powerful in all aspects of changing state policies, and seeing the parents wanting to use this advocacy work that they were taught in this training in other aspects of their life moving forward. So I think we are over our 5 minutes. So I think now it is time to mobilize some of that knowledge.